All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're excited to introduce our next panel, Bitcoin from start to finish. We have Chantel, Greg, Mark, and Matt. Take it away.
All right, thanks everyone. The cool part about this topic is we can pretty much talk about whatever we want. And so given that we're talking about from start to finish, the journey that everyone has their own unique journey through Bitcoin, I think the most logical place to start is for everyone to introduce themselves, and as part of that, go through their own Bitcoin journey. So why don't we start with you, Mark?
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Connors. I'm from Belmar, New Jersey, by way of New York, Bronxville, New York, a little suburb of New York City. I've been in finance since being on Solomon's trading desk in '86 as a college intern. I've watched the evolution of finance for a while and bought my first wrapped Bitcoin in the ETF GBTC in, I think, 2021. Started professionally as a head of research in 2022 at a Canadian firm and came at it from the problem in finance. But as Matt Dines, was it Matt who was here saying about America? I now realize that the remedy's there, so I'm not as anxious as I was when I was a TradFi guy.
Hello, I'm Greg Rands. I'm with Revolution Mortgage now. My Bitcoin journey started in 2018 on Coinbase, and made a purchase, and within a week watched it crash at 60%, like most people who enter Bitcoin buying the top. Left it alone for a good 6 months, came back, and it had gone up in value since when I bought it, so I started putting in the work. Tried to put a bunch of capital in there to buy more Bitcoin at that point, and had my bank account shut down twice through Coinbase, which was a fun journey in itself. But that sort of led me to the community and researching, what Bitcoin is, and equally important, what's happening with our money, and really got me into it. So I started building nodes, got involved with PlebNet on the Lightning Network during COVID, and really went down the mining rabbit hole and all of these things. And now I'm with traditional finance mortgages for residential mortgages, and we're looking forward to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac seeing Bitcoin as an asset and being able to get loans based on that without having to liquidate it. So thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Chantel. I'm the VP of Operations at Bitcoin Well. My Bitcoin journey started way back in 2009, but unfortunately it's not the journey that I was hoping for at that point in time. I was going to university on Vancouver Island. One of my friends had casually brought up Bitcoin, said it was going to change the world, and I called him stupid. So he asked me to give him $20 and he would help me buy Bitcoin, and I said no, I needed that $20 to buy pizza and beer. So unfortunately, I missed out on a huge opportunity, but I think at that point in time, I really didn't understand the problem that Bitcoin was needing to solve. Fast forward to 2019, and Adam O'Brien, our CEO, he became my client, and I was helping them from a business consulting standpoint and hiring their technology team. So naturally, as I'm working with the company, I'm starting to understand more and more about Bitcoin. Adam's orange pilling me along the way. And then, one day I just decided I don't want to work on my fiat job anymore, and I want to take the crazy leap and join a startup Bitcoin company. So when I joined, I still looked at Bitcoin from a number go up technology. I really didn't understand the freedom tool that it is. It wasn't until 2022 when I'm from Canada, and in Canada we had the trucker protests. We started to see our peaceful protests going on as a result of the lockdowns. And unfortunately, those people organizing the protests and donating to the protests had their bank account shut down. That's when I really understood the power of self-custody and why you should always hold Bitcoin on your own and should not rely on any other parties. And so now at Bitcoin as the VP of Operations, I get to build products or help implement products that allow people to completely control their own Bitcoin, but still be able to interact with it in a way that you would with fiat so that you don't have to be reliant on the banking system. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all. So when we're thinking through the Bitcoin journey from start to finish, I think the logical place to start is considerations for buying Bitcoin, but also custodying Bitcoin. I think it's pretty hard to decouple those two concepts, especially in the beginning. And so would you mind kind of walking through what are some of the trade-offs? What's maybe a rubric for how you help clients or friends and family even kind of evaluate that depending on where they're at in their own Bitcoin journey? And Greg, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think we discussed this, and there's sort of three main pieces that, as advisors to grow adoption, we want to look at. There's obviously self-custody, which is the gold standard where we want to get, but exchanges for buying Bitcoin, and then the ETFs, right? And with those three pieces, know who you're working with. Doesn't necessarily make sense to throw a 65-year-old a cold card queue and tell them to figure it out, right? Maybe the ETFs is better suited to get them exposure into Bitcoin. And as you get younger and more interested, it goes to exchanges and then to self-custody. But the importance of, doing your own proof of work and putting in the effort to learn and figure out which rabbit hole is suitable for your customers, right?
Yeah, and that point that Greg was just talking about, we were getting, all talking about how to start this. There's a load of experts here. It was way too wide open to leave it with just, our journey. So we said there are three main entrants, as Greg said. And in my business, I've noticed what people are coming to me for. They're not coming to me for mining. They're not even coming to me for how to spend their UTXOs. They're saying, you're old as dirt, and you're in Bitcoin, and I got to know why. So I'm a storyteller, and I meet my clients where they are, and to try to, maybe it's an ETF for a small number, and then maybe I'll introduce them to some of the clients here on how to do it in a proper multi-sig manner. But I think for all of us, in speaking, because we had to prepare for the conference, these folks know what they do. You're going to tap into the mortgage company, that huge animal, and the unlock is obviously the Fannie Freddie, right? And then with Bitcoin, you're dealing with a load of people in order to get that initial financial freedom. That's not what I do. I'm doing small dinners with clients of RIAs who just want to have some expertise in the space because they're thinking it's there, and they have no idea whether it should be exchange, ETF, or the other, but that's what I'm doing, and I like that way we came up with the three ways to start.
Yeah, I think for myself, I might be a little bit biased, but I would never be advising people on, typically starting with a custodial exchange. And more so what I'm advising them on is how to create the easiest self-custody setup possible. So maybe we're starting small with a with Blue Wallet and just getting through the process of being able to write down your seed phrase. And then we can migrate to an easier hardware wallet. Like I like the Blockstream Jade because, it's still open source. It's obviously non-custodial. And so you always have the power to get your access to your Bitcoin. But it's an easy to use wallet. And then, when you go down the rabbit hole, then you can start with the cold card queue. But I always like to advise people on, at the risks of leaving your Bitcoin on a custodial exchange. Most people think that it's the easy way. You go to Coinbase, set up an account, you buy the Bitcoin, but then you don't realize the risk until either you suffer a phishing attack and your account gets compromised, or you go to withdraw your Bitcoin and your account gets frozen. I had a customer that had millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, and they were trying to do a proof of ownership ceremony during their audit period. Their account got frozen for weeks, and they could not get any support. Imagine your business trying to go through that while you're in audit period, and your auditors are not going to be happy with that. So I always talk about the risks of that, and then just guide them safely towards self-custody.
Is there a history of what's the performance of exchanges as being a sound store of value for clients? Is as far as any hacks on exchanges over the time?
It's got a pretty bad track record. No, but I think about all of the services just within the last 5 years of wallets and custody solutions and insurances and estate planning and all of these different things that have come about. And, you know, it's awesome to be here from a traditional mortgage lending perspective because, you know, it's a sort of first to the game, right? We know it's coming. In a couple more years, you're going to have Chase bankers trying to break down the doors, doing presentations here at places like this. So it's evolving quickly.
Yeah, so I think once you have acquired that Bitcoin, you're custodying some way, there's obviously the next step of that journey. And I think, one potential topic to dive into is just how the ETFs have really changed the game and I think broke the seal in traditional finance. In particular, how does that change some of the calculus from how maybe you were shepherding people through this journey 5 years ago compared to today?
Take that. So I worked at an ETF provider in Canada, 3IQ. That was my first venture running research for them, leaving Credit Suisse as it was, going into that good night, not quite fully defaulted. And the ETFs, the gateway drug, besides talking about ETFs for custody, I'll tell you this. In February of 22, BlackRock wrote a paper, and it was written by a guy named Andrew Ang, and he runs their quant group. And they posted it, and the upshot was, if you have a very risk-averse client, they're going to want to own 85% Bitcoin in a 60-40. So it's going to have 85% Bitcoin in a multi-asset because of its asymmetry, because these quants couldn't believe they've never seen an asset that provided this asymmetry. When BlackRock filed for their ETF in June of 23 in reaction to Coinbase's suit to come to the rescue of Coinbase, they basically said, we're doing this. And that paper that was on a public network was taken down. They pulled it back in-house. That was a signal. No one listened. Mitchnick, Orange Pill, Larry Fink, and they had the fastest ETF to 50 and 100 billion by a factor of 5. So the ETFs, when someone understood it, at the top of the house, they did it. So you're talking about Chase coming on the credit side. When they find out about the collateral and they look at all the signals, ETFs, they look at the Bitcoin volatility going from 200, 100, 60, 30. Lower volatility means what? Lower risk means what? Credit spreads are next. So it's all there. It's happening. I don't know when, but it ain't going to be more than 3 years. And it's going to be a monster. The ETF was the signal, and credit, as a team said here, is multiples larger than the equity market.
Does custodying assets or owning the ETF, does that change the calculus at all for when someone's trying to bring those to bear to get underwritten for a mortgage or anything like that?
No, I mean, they're treated as assets, right? And what we don't have is the ability to treat Bitcoin in exchange custody or self-custody as an asset. So there are mortgage programs for like 401ks where you could have Bitcoin ETFs and you can get credit based on 75% of what you have in the 401k. We can't do that with Bitcoin on an exchange or, Bitcoin with Unchained or Anchor Watch, even though they're backed by the biggest creditors on the planet. So that's what we're waiting for, the guidance from, Pulte pushing Fannie and Freddie. And once that happens, it's the first stepping stone. And then it's just everyone's gonna pile in.
Have any of you had any success stories and where someone has come in through the ETFs and then you've pushed them now in the other direction and gotten them into self-custody or onto an exchange even?
Yeah, absolutely. If anything, the ETFs have been an amazing marketing tool for Bitcoin. I think by promoting ETFs to the masses, it gets people exposed. And the second that you get exposed and you see, okay, what is it like to actually own real Bitcoin, they start to become more and more curious. And so I see customers all the time who are starting to either liquidate their ETFs and starting to buy real Bitcoin, or at least they're getting interested, and they're like, okay, you know what? Now I'll have a bit of a diverse portfolio in terms of holding ETFs, maybe being exposed to some Bitcoin treasury companies, and then also taking the leap to start to own their Bitcoin themselves and hold it in self-custody. And you know what? The longer that people stay in Bitcoin, the higher the allocation is towards real Bitcoin, and the less that they're exposed to the ETFs.
Awesome. I think we probably have time for one more. And so I think maybe let's touch on one of the milestones at the end of your journey, which is inheritance planning. And what are some of the considerations, or how are you advising clients around that, especially knowing that key ownership doesn't necessarily solve all of the legal paperwork ownership issues. And there's kind of an interesting puzzle to solve there, especially given you're in the Canadian jurisdiction. We have some folks in the US jurisdiction. How are you advising clients on that?
I'll leverage off what Chantel just said is it doesn't help if you're wrapped in an ETF, because then BlackRock owns it. Wall Street loves options. And when they have your Bitcoin, they have options. You don't. You can't rip it. You can't borrow against it. You have to deal with their terms of borrowing. So as far as inheritance, the first step is why we started with understand exchanges. There's easy things, and there's really bad things, as we said. ETFs, great gateway. But for inheritance and for your life and for trying to think beyond just, you have to own the coin. So that's where I start, at least.
Yeah, I mean, you got to know your audience, right? I'm using AnchorWatch right now, basically because most of mine is in self-custody, and I would not trust my wife to take that over if something were to happen to me. So I'm covered in that case for now. Hopefully I can get her down that educational path so that she's comfortable managing that on her own. But there are growing services for estate planning and beneficiaries from a Bitcoin perspective that are coming out.
I think the way that I typically advise customers just on key ownership and backups is the same way that I'm helping them understand self-custody and how to safely and securely store and manage their keys. Show that to your next of kin, show that to your partner. Sit down with them, make sure that they have a really good understanding of how to recover your Bitcoin if something happens to you, or how to access your Bitcoin. Don't keep all that knowledge to yourself. You have to be able to have somebody else that is extremely trusted access that Bitcoin, so that unfortunately you don't lose it, or your family doesn't lose it if something horrible happens to you.
I had that recently. So we just moved some Bitcoin into a loan at Unchained. And I showed my wife moving from one account to the next. I talked about this on the write-up tonight, Joey, or in the hike. And she's like, what? You just moved, large six figures in 8.5 minutes for 20 cents. Because she's moved our stuff in TradFi. So that, she kind of walked out of the room going, 20 cents. So I think seeing the tangible impact that this isn't just magic money, that it actually sits in a shielded, protected chain and can be moved anywhere. That was a big deal for someone, again, we're not 25 years old, and she got it.
Mark, Greg, Chantel, thank you so much.
Thank you.